Welcome to Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine. I'm your host, Jill Jardine, Master's in Counseling Psychology, professional astrologer, psychic healer, and yogi. In this episode, my guest is Sarah Adams, psychic and intuitive, and she's going to share with us an episode on Samhain, Halloween, and All Souls Day, the New Age edition. Stay tuned to find out more. Hey listeners, I want to remind you to support Cosmic Scene with Jill Jardine podcast. You can do that by going on to www.buzzsprout.com/958528/support. This will be in the show notes. Welcome to the episode, Samhain, Halloween, and All Souls Day, the New Age edition, featuring my guest, Sarah Adams. Sarah Adams is an intuitive consultant, psychic astrologer, and founder of Water and Earth Intuitive Consulting, offering professional tarot and astrology, as well as channeling, Reiki, and chakra work. She has been practicing tarot and astrology and doing various kinds of readings since 2001. In addition to offering guidance to clients via private readings, parties, fundraisers, events, and workshops, Sarah is also a writer, marketing consultant, and event planner, and in her free time is training for her private pilot license to fly aircraft. The most important role in her life, however, is being a mom to her 3 daughters, age 9, 11, and 12, who she is raising in historic Plymouth, Massachusetts, in a pink home they proudly call Girl Town. You can reach Sarah at Sarah, capital SARAH _Adams, capital ADAMS1 at yahoo.com, or give her a text at 774-708-0703. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome Sarah Adams.
Hi, Jill.
So glad to have you here doing this special New Age edition of Samhain, Halloween, and All Souls Day. You're going to talk about the pagan roots and how this applies to current times.
Absolutely. Happy Halloween, or Samhain, as the Gaelics called it. Samhain is actually spelt, if anybody wants to Google it, S is in Sam, A, M is in Mary, H, A, I, N is in Nancy. So Samhain actually means summer's end in Gaelic, and it is a festival of the dead marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of the winter or darker half of the year in the northern hemisphere. This ancient festival can also be seen in other cultures and around the world, such as the Spanish Day of the Dead on November 1st and 2nd, which in Mexico actually has ancient Aztec influence. For today's episode, we are focusing on the Celtic holiday in the Western culture, and because purposely it was in the West that Samhain originated, and it was also in the West that it was Christianized and turned into All Souls Day. So I'm going to cover some of that history. So Samhain was originally held on November 1st, but it became more and more common over the century for celebrations to begin on the eve of Samhain, the 31st of October, at sunset. And this was first celebrated in Neolithic times. Researchers are now saying up to 6,000 years ago,
Wow.
Samhain was celebrated. And then it became more widely spread and more of a real common Celtic holiday when the Celts invaded Britannia. So the Celts invaded Britannia about 2,000 years ago. And since then, it became very popular. Ancient Celts considered it the most sacred holiday. And it was, as mentioned before, a fire festival celebrating the final harvest because, summertime is now over. We're done with the growing season. So it's time, to acknowledge winter's coming. We're going into the darker half of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, and we have to gather our resources. We have to gather all the final harvest and then store up for the winter.
Including the pumpkins and the
Yes.
squashes.
Yes. And what's really cool Jack-o'-lanterns came out of this time. That wasn't actually a modern day invention. They would carve squash and gourds, and then it turned into pumpkins because they figured out those are easier to carve into scary, grotesque, monsters to ward off dark spirits. And the whole idea was the veil was thinner between the two worlds, between the physical world and the world of spirit. And they wanted their ancestors to come, so they'd put out the sweets for the ancestors, and then they would have scary costumes on and, the jack-o'-lanterns or the gourds carved to ward off the spirits they didn't want to visit them.
So they wanted only their friendly ancestors. So this is the evolution of Halloween as we know it from these ancient times about 2,000 years ago.
Yes.
Which gets brushed over because, as you mentioned, Christianity showed up on the scene.
Absolutely. So in the 9th century, Pope Gregory gets involved. They notice, the Christians notice that Samhain is a major festival, and they've conquered all these lands, and the peoples under them are still wanting to hold on to some of their old customs and rituals. So, as most people should know, many modern holidays and customs and celebrations, and including even the Christmas tree and the birthday cake, all have pagan roots. So anyways, we go to the 9th century. The Christians decide to reframe Samhain as a Christian celebration, and Pope Gregory declares the holiday as All Saints' Day, also known as All Souls' Day, which was observed the 31st of October through November 2nd. In our modern world, November 2nd is still known as All Souls' Day. And it's interesting because what's gotten lost. So we still have Halloween, we still have All Souls Day. There's not often like the connection made between the two.
Right.
So there's kind of like that buried connection. And when we live in a decisive world and fear and religion gets mixed in, sometimes there can be confusion about origins and what is good and what is bad. And I'm just going to kind of like give an example. So I recently had to explain to my daughter, who had heard that Halloween was the high holiday of the Church of Satan, that it was a holiday about the devil and that it was dark and about witches and witchcraft. So I had to reframe to my child, who's now afraid of Halloween, what Halloween was all about. So my mother and I sat her down and we explained to her it's a celebration observed all around the world, and it came from, yes, we know All Hallows Day, it's the Western Christian feast, but before that it was an ancient holiday celebrated by many cultures as the last harvest. And then it became a popular commercialized holiday in America. And
only since like 1950.
Yeah. It was very like, it almost like seemed like it was like all rolled out with like modern day advertising and commercialism and capitalism and consumerism.
Right. All the candy.
Yes.
And then
costumes,
the trick-or-treating. And
yes.
It being safe maybe in the 60s and 70s, and then getting a little bit more dicey as we got into the 80s and 90s with kids going out trick-or-treating.
Yes. So it's interesting because we have these modern celebrations, but we don't necessarily acknowledge or understand the roots that they come from. And part of it was that, Samhain came out of a time when a pre-Christian time when we worshiped the goddess, the great mother, and
the earth,
Mother Earth. She was the main deity, and it makes sense. She was birthing the final harvest, helping us prepare for the coming winter and the darkness. And I think it's no coincidence this all is happening in Scorpio season, right? Like this year, the sun goes into Scorpio October 23rd. Right in time to get into the mood for Halloween.
And it's actually a Scorpio moon on Halloween this year.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. New moon in Scorpio, November 1st, All Souls Day this year. So, I find that interesting. There seems to be like a reclamation of the feminine divine in humanity. And maybe part of that, as we pay more attention to Mother Earth and honor her, is paying attention to our history with Mother Earth. And I'm not saying people need to like go out and have like pagan worship festivals, but it kind of was a source or a root of like our modern day perspectives and
Well, ancient societies,
holidays.
pagans were very connected to the earth and her growing seasons because their
Right.
survival depended upon it. So they did celebrate the Beltane when it was spring, and the fires in May 1st. And then the opposite holiday is Halloween, Samhain, when it was the end of the growth season and everybody had to go within, and they needed their lights, their lanterns. They needed the light to take them through the dark months. They needed their food. They needed, even though Mother Earth was drying up and not going to be as fertile or not fertile at all, they still honored her for what she gave in the 6 months prior from Beltane to Samhain. So everything was all earth based.
And what if these ancient symbolic practices can still be reflected in our modern world and in our modern thought processes? Even, I mean, the ancient practices were literal, but now we can actually reflect on these themes symbolically in our own lives. So, for example, we both mentioned that Scorpio season, Halloween this year is on a new moon in Scorpio. Also, think about daylight savings time. The themes of these ancient holidays, Samhain, Halloween, All Souls, are quite appropriate as we go into daylight savings. We're going to have less light, more darkness. And even as our world and lives may like be up in the air because we're going through a lot of astrological transitions, we have to still center and think about what do we need to do or adjust to find a sense of security and feel better about the unknown as we're heading into this winter, into the season of darkness, but also as we're heading into a great unknown for our country, our destinies, etc. You know, the seasons, astrology, even these old ancient practices, it's all cyclical. And these themes, they keep coming back and then we readjust them. So,
Right, ancient themes for modern times, as you
exactly.
had mentioned,
Yeah.
pagan festivals for the new age. You know, I'm curious too that we go into Scorpio season around the 21st, 22nd, 23rd of October each year, and we stay in it until about the 21st of November. And within that time is Halloween, so strategically in the middle of it or at the beginning of it. But some of the themes of this time of the year and the sun sign Scorpio is the connection, as you mentioned earlier, with the hidden realms or the realms of spirit or the ancestors, those who have passed away. That's why, and our own souls are all our souls. So that's why the themes of things like past life,
Right.
past life regression, past lives, mediumship, deceased loved ones all tend to come forward at that time of year. And that's also, especially with the burgeoning new age, that people are realizing that. And instead of just Halloween parties, there's a lot to do with this being used for doing some recovery of ancestors, of loved ones on the other side, and of past lives. And also, then it's also known as the season of the witch. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. So, first of all, let's talk a little bit about the season of the witch, and then we'll go into the past lives. So, what was the disconnect between Samhain and All Souls? Uh, you know, it was political times in the ninth century when Pope Gregory Christianized the holiday. And the ninth century, at that point, we were deep into an extinguishing of the honoring of the goddess. There was a smothering of the feminine divine. And all over Europe, I mean, priestesses of the goddess were killed. And, it was during those times, those centuries, where monotheistic modern day organized religions really took hold, that the idea that if you weren't following that you were dark or you were evil or you were a witch came about. And it's interesting because, like, what does the word witch even mean? And I'm going to give a quote from a Wiccan priestess and journalist, Margot Adler. And she wrote this in this book, Drawing Down the Moon, witches, druids, goddess worshippers, and other pagans in America. And she wrote in this book, the very power of the word witch lies in its imprecision. What does it even mean? It's like no pun intended, it's like a witch hunt. Anybody can point and say witch. The Salem witch trials, it's like, what were they really actually being accused of? So it's in that imprecision, it's in that large gray area of the word witch. They can use it to so widely oppress women in history and even in modern times. Because it's not, this journalist and author Adler wrote, quote, "It is not merely a word, but an archetype, a cluster of powerful images." And where the propaganda was successful in turning the collective consciousness against witches and even Samhain and Halloween and anything considered outside the realm of the organized religion that was the status quo, what really drove that propaganda home was connecting witches with Satan. That any woman, but I mean, it could have been any woman who was reading at a time she wasn't supposed to be reading, who was speaking her mind.
Planting a herb garden.
Planting an herb garden. There's
using medicinal herbs.
Right. There's the mythology. Not the mythology. There's the history of the wise women in villages. Wise women often lived at the outskirts of the villages, and people would go to them for remedies, readings, spells, etc. But then they would often blame the wise woman. So they go to her for the remedy for their problem, but say it didn't work out, they blame her. So it was the wise woman in the outskirts of the village who lived like a hermit and everybody went to her, or the witch in the woods and people would go for their remedies or readings or whatever. But then they were the first ones to cast the stone at the hand, biting.
Throw them under the bus.
Yeah, or bite the hand that feeds you. So healers, female healers in power, let's just say basically the last 2,000 years was not our time. and
right.
And I'd love to go back even a little deeper in history, okay? So not everybody knows about this story, and I think it's something that should be at the forefront of all of our consciousness.
Are you interested in natural health and regenerative healing? Do you want to work with vibration to heal your body? Check out this patented wearable light technology at www.lifewave.com/JillJar. LifeWave is a company that has patches that you wear, so it's not transdermal, you're not taking anything in, and what these patches do, they activate your body's light. It's called biomodulation, and that light is activated, your body starts producing GHK, copper peptides, which in turn activates stem cell production. That's right. So wearing these patches will regenerate your body, reflects your body's light back into your tissues, and you become more vital, energized, reduce pain, inflammation, improvement of sleep, increased strength are all possibilities. Other benefits could be hair quality, rapid wound healing, mental clarity, increased joy and stamina, your skin appearance and wrinkles could go away. Again, all probable and possible depending on your chemistry. Others have enjoyed increased sports performance and recovery and restored muscle or skeletal conditions. Check it out at lifewave.com/JillJar and order yours today.
In the circa 400 AD, the most powerful woman of the modern world was Hypatia of Alexandria, Egypt, where the great library of Alexandria was, and it was really like a mecca for teaching, right? But in the city of Alexandria at this time, so it's 400 AD, Christianity is really getting a foothold, okay? But Alexandria is like the center of civilization, 400 AD, and Hypatia is the most powerful woman in the world, and she's the main advisor to the emperor of Rome at that time. So it's really interesting, and she's really kind of a phenomenon of her time because she's in power. she's a female, but she's teaching all men because only men were allowed to go to these great universities and schools in Alexandria.
The academies,
Yes,
right.
but she was so advanced and so revered. She was the head teacher. She was the advisor to the emperor. And she was a pagan, but she taught Christians, she taught Jews, she taught probably Muslims, she taught everybody. And she was actually a virgin. She dedicated her life to greater wisdom and knowledge and became celibate to be like a pure channel. And she was a brilliant mathematician and an astronomer. And then in between 410 and 415 AD, Archbishop Cyril, Christian Archbishop Cyril, arrives in Alexandria. And he politically wants to get in with the emperor, and he really wants to make Christianity the main religion of Alexandria. And Hypatia is the emperor's advisor, and he, on her advisement, disses Archbishop Cyril. So Cyril goes on a campaign against Hypatia. She's a witch, she's a pagan whore, all this propaganda, not true about her at all. He got up like a mob. He incited a mob. And she was on her way to see the emperor, and she's in her carriage. And at this point, she's an older woman now. She's like, I'm not going to say like elderly, but she's older, okay? And a little bit frail. And she's a peaceful woman, accepting of all. And she's just going through the city of Alexandria in her carriage to see the emperor. Archbishop Cyril's mob pulled her from the carriage and they dragged her to a temple, which was a pagan temple, and it had all the ancient gods of mythology, statues up all around this temple. And in this temple, they essentially, it's really bad. They took anything they could find. They grabbed anything they could find, tiles, ceramic shells, and they flayed her. They skinned her alive. And this is history. This isn't like a myth. And they also defaced the entire temple, all the, Greek, Roman gods, goddesses. And then they brought her to the center of Alexandria and they burned her in a bonfire. And historically, that is known as the demarcation point, the end of paganism and the beginning of Christianity really taking its foothold. And because as she was burning, Archbishop Cyril announced to the whole city, this is what happens to pagans. This is what happens to witches. I think it's really interesting that it was actually almost a female martyr, the martyring of the feminine divine, of the last
Right.
woman in power in the ancient world that really kickstarted Christianity.
Right. And there's been a fear of women for the remaining years. You
Yeah.
don't see women priests. You don't, because why is that? Well, in the Vedic tradition, women or the divine feminine energy is power. We call it Shakti. And the Shakti is in our body at the base of the spine. So we all have that divine feminine energy, whether we're female or male, and it moves up to meet the divine masculine called Shiva. And then together, the consciousness is raised. So that's an archetype of working female and male together. But then people would say, well, why in modern India does it seem like women are oppressed? Well, again, that has to do with some other societal things. But it's always been historically that women actually have the power and that men, in order to hold power, have repressed it, unfortunately. And that's where we're seeing some changes. But we can learn from the past. And as I always like to say, God is back and boy, is she pissed.
Yeah. And you know what? These modern day themes, it's reemergence of old cycles coming to light. Like, the oppression of women in India, that's been hidden up until now. Only recently are we reading about the large scale, like sex crimes against women, for example. And it's not that it never stopped happening. It's that if oppression of women seems prominent in our modern world right now, it's because it never stopped. This is the first time we're talking about it.
Right. It's always been there.
Right.
It's always been there. And now people are really threatened around the world when there are elections or in politics, when it looks like women are coming to power. But I mean, there have been a lot of precedents with Margaret Thatcher in England,
Right.
and she got a lot of bad rap because people didn't like that she was a female.
The Iron Lady.
The Iron Lady, right. And then Think back to Queen Elizabeth I when she came to power. In that time period in the 1500s, she was really having a lot of the whole male hierarchical system was threatened when she came into power. But again, that was like, a time period and she took on her power, but she had to deal with so much.
And think about her PR. Queen one of Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. She was not a Virgin Queen.
Right.
But she didn't get married. So she had to maintain that image for respect. She couldn't advertise that she had lovers. And actually, one of my great relatives was her lover. Because I on my British side, yeah, Sir Robert Dudley of Leicester. So he was like her main lover. He was played by Fiennes, not Ralph Fiennes.
Joseph Fiennes.
Joseph Fiennes in the Elizabeth movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, right, but that was all had to be hidden and it couldn't be above board. Where men in power back in those days, oh my gosh, they traipsed through their mistresses, their lovers in front of their wives. But that's always been the paradigm, and I think that we're seeing this all change.
Sure.
But and the divine feminine is back. And we had talked in an earlier podcast about when men come in touch with their own feminine or their intuition, their female side, that miracles can happen for them.
Right. And the thing is, it's like the yin-yang symbol within, the dualities within. We all have male and female within us. So when the genders or sexes are fighting against each other, we're actually fighting against ourselves.
Right.
And I know personally, doing my own like soul journey work and even like revisiting past lives, like I've done past life regression work recently, and the two past lives that I've been focusing the most on were two past lives being a man. So it's like whatever body we're in right now,
Right.
with whatever private parts you have, however you want to identify, the idea is we're on a planet duality. The duality of light, dark, male, female, and we all have that within us, just like the yin-yang symbol.
Well, also when you're getting into past life paradigm, then we've all been male, we've all been female, we've been every race.
Right.
And so when you start looking at the world construct from that insight, you realize that, again, I was that. I went through that person's struggle. I have been through that. Right. And it makes you think like, well, why in this carnation did I incarnate as a white woman? What are the lessons my soul needs to learn? And when we start looking at that, and when the greater consciousness looks at that, I think we'll be less separatism and more unity, and realizing we're all on a journey, and that, therefore the good grace of God go I. Like we could be in any situation, in any body, in any race, and not one is better than the other because we're all from source. But getting back to past lives in our remaining minutes here, you had a very pivotal past life awakening, which is fits right into this because Scorpio season is the season of remembering past lives.
Right. So with Scorpio season, with Samhain coming, it is quite relevant to talk about my past life gifts that have been unlocked. And I just wanted to hammer in on a point first that you just said about unity consciousness. When we acknowledge that we are multidimensional beings, living many, many lives on the planet. We've had many incarnations, and we might have been all races, religions, genders, etc. That puts us in a place of unity consciousness.
Right.
It's not about just identifying as who we are now. What about identifying with this whole human experience?
Exactly.
So I, right now, might be a female who is on the path of a goddess, and I'm an astrologer, but I had like 4 past lives that I worked through this past summer to fall to get where I am now, and it's really helped me. I just wanted to share this story. So, and this is quite relevant. I had a past life as a nun on the Isle of Iona in Scotland, and it held me back for a long time because I felt like I had a fear of organized religion because of a fear of oppression. So I unlock that lifetime, and then all of a sudden I get all these spiritual downloads, but it's like Mother Mary energy, it's Christ consciousness energy. So new gifts and energy and spiritual insights and even guides coming to me, or feeling the divine presence of these Christian deities that I was not truly able to allow into my heart until I released this past lifetime as an oppressed, abused nun on the Isle of Iona off of Scotland. So then I do that work, and all of a sudden, Salem witch trials come up for me. So right there, okay? And it was funny because I randomly met a medium, and I told you about this, Jill. I was at a crystal shop, like I got a coffee. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna look at this crystal shop, and this medium's sitting there. And I'm like, okay, I'll get a reading. I sit down with her and she's like, Mother Mary's all around you. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I just unlocked this lifetime. She's with me now. And she goes, oh my God, the Salem witch trials. I see you at the Salem witch trials. It was awful. And I'm like, I always knew it. So I clear those 2 lives. All of a sudden, I'm feeling much less vulnerable and oppressed in a woman in this modern Western Christianized world. So I'm now all of a sudden like, I'm good with God. I found my peace, all this, okay? I'm still goddess worshiping and I do my tarot cards and astrology every day, but it's this whole new level because truly, organized religion is just the people making their rules. True divine source spirituality, it's all religions encompass it. We're
Right.
just fighting over the
Truth
details.
is one, but many are the names.
So then I unlock these lives, okay? I unlocked 2 more lives after this as a pilot. One as a pilot in World War II, the other as a pilot in Vietnam, male, where I was a male. I am now learning to fly planes on the weekends and going for my private pilot license.
Wow.
And I'm learning the mechanics of the plane. Every flight, I go under the plane, I crawl on top of it, I check every inch of the plane for a pre-flight safety check. I check the oil levels, the fuel levels. I check the fuel quality. I'm learning the inside and out of the plane, as well as this very complicated dashboard. And it's funny though, I'm learning it as a human, but simultaneously, I'm channeling these past lives. Like,
Right.
I don't even know what's under the hood of my car, but now all of a sudden I know how a plane works and I know how to fly it.
So you do have soul memory then. You remember things.
Yes.
It's like you don't know where that is coming from, but you just have like an innate memory of how to work the dashboard and other things with these planes.
And even being up in the sky, flying it. And when I first went there, my instructor's like, are you a female mechanic? Like, who are you? Where did you come from? What's your story? And I didn't tell him this, but what happened is I clear the past life as a nun and the past life of being killed as a witch before I go to Alaska for a trip this summer. And I'm in Alaska and I end up staying on Lake Hood and I'm learning all about the planes, and there's like an aviation museum and a World War II museum there, and all of a sudden, like something clicked to me. I'm like, I got to get in a plane. I got to learn how to fly a plane. So I get home from Alaska and I step out on my back deck and I'm like, what's next? And a small plane flies over my backyard, as it does every day because I live right next to an airport and an aviation flight school. So I went across the world, did all this meditative work, and like both in the wilderness of Alaska and like on Lake Hood, and where it's the world's largest seaplane base. And then I come back from the other side of the world to discover what was in my own backyard, the flight school, and what was within me, the aptitude to fly a darn plane. So you know what? We can empower ourselves, whether you're clearing this life, personal issues or trauma, or past life karma and trauma. You yourself can do it. And right now, Scorpio season, the veil thin with Halloween, Samhain, and All Souls Day, now is the time to do it. Look within. Learn to read your own soul library. You know, Akashic records are like a really like key term here. You don't have to go to a specific Akashic records expert or read all the books. They're within you.
Right. It's all there. Reclaim it. Sarah Adams, fascinating, excellent episode. Thank you so much for being here and getting us all up to speed with the holidays of Halloween, Samhain, and All Souls Day, and also the value of past life therapy work.
Yes.
And this whole, it's all within us and it gets reflected back to us by our experiences out in the world. I love this.
And shout out to you, Jill. Jill Jardine, Vedic priestess phenomenon, gave me all these mantras to work through my current life trauma and past life karma. So as I'm working out past lives as Christian, past lives as, pagan, wartime trauma, all this stuff. What helps me, really thread through it and cut through it is Vedic mantras. So there you go. Whether you're turning to Christianity, whether you're looking to the old ways of, paganism or on a path of the goddess, you can work with it all. If you want to make a recipe of Christianity and, goddess worship and then throw in some Buddhism. It's like, what works for you? Because it's all the same.
Right. Truth is one, but many are the names. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Jill.
It's a great time to book a reading. So check out my website, JillJardineAstrology.com/shop, and pick the kind of reading or service you would like. I hope you enjoyed this episode on Samhain, Halloween, and All Souls Day New Age Edition featuring my guest, Sarah Adams. Remember to download, subscribe, share, and give us a 5-star review. Sending you scorpionic Halloween vibrations of light, awareness, and awakening through the quantum field.